Look around this room. Think about the people in your life right now. The friends, the partners, the colleagues who smile when you walk in. Now let me tell you an uncomfortable truth about human nature. Every single person you encounter is running a subconscious algorithm. Every second, their brain is scanning you, reading your micro expressions, measuring your vocal tone, and assessing your emotional wealth. And if you are an empath, if you are someone who carries a genuine, unforced warmth, an authentic baseline of joy that lights up a room, you possess the rarest commodity on the human market: real emotional wealth. But here is the danger. That wealth doesn't just attract love. It acts as a beacon for a very specific, highly dangerous psychological profile: the individual who is emotionally bankrupt. When they first see you, they are intoxicated. They gravitate toward you. They want to be in your orbit. They tell you how special you are. But underneath that fascination lies a hidden, simmering rot. They don't want to celebrate your light. They want to consume it. They believe that by being close to you, your joy will magically rub off on them, that it will fill the empty, aching void inside their own chest. But psychology tells us that emotional wealth cannot be transferred. It can only be cultivated from within. So, what happens when they realize your light cannot cure their darkness? The fascination curdles. The admiration turns into a bitter, toxic envy. Suddenly, the very warmth they praised becomes an insult to their existence. Your happiness highlights their misery. Your authenticity exposes their fake persona. They begin to secretly resent the very light they crawled toward. And that is when the quiet sabotage begins. The subtle, passive-aggressive digs, the eye rolls when you succeed, the slow, calculated gaslighting designed to make you doubt your own value. They have shifted from trying to share your light to trying to dim it, because if they can't have it, they sure as hell aren't going to let you keep it. If you have ever felt a sudden, inexplicable shift in someone who claimed to love you, if you have ever watched a close friend or partner slowly start to punish you for being happy, you need to understand exactly what is happening under the hood of their brain. Because if you don't learn how to spot this behavioral pattern early, you will spend your entire life bleeding your emotional energy dry, trying to fix people who secretly want to see you broken. Stay with me for the next few minutes. I am going to peel back the layers of human manipulation and give you the exact psychological blueprints of why this happens, how to decode their hidden hostility, and how to build an unshakable armor around your light. Every human interaction is a silent negotiation for status, power, and emotional survival. When an empath walks into a room, their behavioral profile is instantly readable. Your shoulders are relaxed. Your eye contact is engaging, not predatory. Your voice carries a resonant, authentic warmth. To the untrained eye, you are just a kind person. To a behavioral profiler, you are a walking generator of emotional currency. And in a world where millions of people are running on empty, that makes you a primary target. The most engaging anomaly in human behavior is the phenomenon of the moth to a flame. We assume the moth loves the light. The truth is, the moth is blindly driven by a hardwired instinct it doesn't understand, often leading to its own destruction. The people who enter your life and secretly harbor resentment are no different. They are driven by a profound internal deficit. They don't just admire you, they are staging an unconscious coup to take what you have. If you leave this room today without understanding the mechanics of this dynamic, you will remain prey to the emotional predators who exploit your empathy. But if you watch this entire breakdown, if you learn to see the hidden levers of envy and manipulation, you will never be gaslit or blindsided by a hidden enemy again. You will gain absolute clarity over who deserves a seat at your table and who needs to be cut out entirely. Let's look at the mechanics of the initial contact. A resentful person, often possessing high narcissistic traits, is hyper-attuned to social value. They see your authenticity, your ability to connect, and your resilience. To them, this looks like magic. They think, if I can attach myself to this person, I will finally feel whole. I will look good by association. They use a behavioral tactic called mirroring and love bombing. They match your cadence. They validate your feelings. They make themselves appear as the perfect ally. But this isn't connection. It's an acquisition strategy. They are purchasing a ticket to your theater, hoping to absorb the energy you put out. Here is where the psychology flips, and it happens with mathematical certainty. Within a few weeks or months, the illusion shatters. The resentful person realizes that sitting next to a campfire doesn't make them a fire. Your joy remains yours. Your peace remains yours. They are still empty. At this exact moment, your light stops being a comfort and starts becoming a threat. Why? Because human beings judge themselves based on comparison. When they look at you, they don't see a friend anymore. They see a mirror that reflects their own inadequacy. Your ability to forgive highlights their bitterness. Your success highlights their stagnation. Your genuine kindness exposes their calculated manipulation. They think, why do they get to be happy while I am suffering? What makes them so special? The admiration dies, and the secret resentment is born. Because they cannot openly admit their envy without looking weak, they must resort to covert behavioral manipulation. They cannot attack you directly, so they use micro-assaults to slowly chip away at your baseline. Pay attention to these three behavioral tells. The minimized win. You share good news. An authentic person celebrates. The resentful person immediately shifts the topic, brings up a counterexample, or introduces a negative what-if scenario to instantly lower your emotional state. The double-edged compliment. You look so good today, I barely recognized you. Or, I love how you just wear anything without caring what people think. These are calculated delivery systems designed to drop a seed of self-doubt into your subconscious while maintaining plausible deniability. The leakage of micro-expressions. Watch their face the moment you succeed. For a split second, before the fake smile activates, you will see a flash of contempt, a slight pull of the lip upward on one side, or a hardening of the eyes. That is the truth leaking out. The most insidious part of this dynamic is that they use your own greatest strength as a weapon against you. They know you are wired to fix things. They know you hate conflict and will over-explain yourself to maintain harmony. So, they play the victim. They make you feel guilty for your boundaries. If you call them out on their subtle hostility, they flip the script. You're just being hypersensitive. I was joking. Because you are an empath, your brain naturally defaults to, did I do something wrong? How can I fix this? You double down on your kindness. You pour more light into them. You try harder to please them. And in doing so, you feed the exact monster that is trying to consume you, exhausting your own psychological reserves while they sit back and watch you drain yourself. The solution to this is not to dim your light. The world does not need fewer kind people. It needs fewer defenseless ones. You must transition from a passive empath to a strategically defended empath. This requires an immediate shift in how you process human behavior. First, stop listening to words. Words are cheap. They are easily manufactured. Start tracking baseline behaviors over time. Look at how a person reacts when they think no one is watching, or how they respond to your absolute best days. Second, implement absolute boundaries. A boundary isn't a wall to keep people out. It's a gatekeeper that demands an entry fee. That fee is mutual respect, consistency, and safety. If someone consistently leaks contempt or passive-aggressive resentment, you do not try to heal them. You do not ask them what's wrong. You calmly, coldly, and permanently remove them from your inner circle. You carry a rare, beautiful spark in a world that can often be incredibly dark. Do not allow your emotional wealth to be strip-mined by people who refuse to dig their own wells. Protect your light, control your environment, and command the respect your authenticity deserves. The proximity illusion is one of the most sophisticated deceptions in the entire theater of human interaction. To understand it, we must first dissect the fundamental mismatch in how the empath and the covertly resentful individual view social connection. When you possess an authentic emotional baseline, a natural warmth, resilience, and clarity that glows from within, you perceive your light as a communal asset. You naturally assume that when people gather around you, they are there to share in a mutual exchange of human warmth. You see connection as a collaborative campfire. But the emotionally bankrupt individual sees it as a resource extraction site. They suffer from a profound internal deficit, an empty space where self-worth and genuine joy should live. When they observe your light, their subconscious algorithm does not register an opportunity for connection. It registers an opportunity for a cure. They are under the absolute psychological illusion that mere proximity to your light will somehow spontaneously generate light inside of themselves. They believe that by sitting in your orbit, absorbing your praise, riding the co-waves of your success, and consuming your emotional energy, their internal darkness will magically dissipate. This is why their initial approach is often so intense, so sudden, and so highly complementary. They are intoxicated by the proximity, operating under the false hypothesis that your emotional wealth can be transferred through osmosis. However, psychology tells us that human emotion does not work like heat conduction. You cannot warm a cold soul simply by standing near it, if that soul is fundamentally incapable of retaining warmth. As time passes, the harsh reality of this illusion begins to set in for the resentful person. They realize that despite being in your presence, despite taking up your time, and despite consuming your validation, they still wake up with the exact same hollow, bitter feeling inside their own chest. Your presence has not cured them. It hasn't fixed their internal machinery. The illusion of proximity shatters, and it is at this exact, precise moment that the psychological trajectory takes a deeply dark turn. Because they lack the emotional maturity to look inward and take accountability for their own internal state, they externalize the blame. They subconsciously conclude that if your light didn't cure them, it must be because your light is fraudulent, arrogant, or intentionally designed to make them feel small. The fascination they initially felt curls into a sharp, quiet malice. They begin to view your natural joy not as a gift, but as an active, living insult to their existence. They stay close to you, but the motive has entirely shifted. They are no longer there to absorb the light. They are there to monitor it, to analyze it for weaknesses, and to prepare for the inevitable moment where they can begin to dim it. They remain in your proximity not out of love or admiration, but out of a desperate, hidden need to witness your decline, believing that if they can just bring your baseline down to match their own, they will finally stop feeling the agony of their own inferiority. They become a permanent, hostile observer disguised as a confidant, sitting right beside you, waiting for the perfect moment to strike a blow against the very warmth they once begged to be near. The unconscious mirror is the exact psychological mechanism that transforms an initial, intense fascination into a silent, venomous hostility. To comprehend this shift, you have to realize that an empath does not have to say a word or take a single calculated action to disrupt the psychological equilibrium of a resentful person. Your mere existence, your natural authenticity, and your unforced emotional baseline act as an involuntary, high-definition mirror. When a person who is deeply insecure, highly manipulative, or emotionally fractured looks at you, they are not actually seeing you. They are being forced to look at a reflection of everything they lack. In the beginning, they are drawn to your light because they think they can use it to hide their own flaws. They wear you like a badge of honor, believing that associating with someone so genuine will make them appear genuine by proxy. But authenticity cannot be faked for long, and it certainly cannot be stolen. As the relationship progresses, the resentful person is forced to confront the staggering contrast between your internal world and theirs. When you handle a crisis with grace, the mirror shows them their own volatile defensiveness. When you celebrate someone else's success with genuine joy, the mirror exposes their deep-seated envy. When you speak the truth effortlessly, the mirror shines a harsh, unforgiving spotlight on the elaborate web of lies and personas they have constructed just to survive socially. This constant involuntary exposure becomes a form of psychological torture for them. They cannot look at you without being reminded of their own inadequacy, their own emotional bankruptcy, and the staggering distance between who they pretend to be and who they actually are. Because the human ego will do almost anything to protect itself from the agony of self-awareness, their brain must find a way to break the mirror. They cannot accept that the problem lies within themselves, because that would require a level of accountability and emotional labor they are entirely unwilling to perform. Therefore, they decide that the mirror itself is evil. They convince themselves that your purity is a performance, that your kindness is a manipulative tactic, and that your natural confidence is actually a hidden form of arrogance designed to look down on them. They project their own internal rot onto you, convincing themselves that you are the one who is flawed, fake, and malicious. This is the precise moment when their internal fascination turns into quiet malice. The secret resentment becomes a driving force in their behavior. They begin to study you, not out of admiration, but to find a crack in the glass. They are desperately searching for any flaw, any mistake, or any moment of weakness that they can expose, to prove to themselves and to the world that you are just as broken and dark as they are. They need to see you fail, trip, or lose your temper, because a single flaw in your character validates their entire warped worldview. If they can force you to react with bitterness, if they can bait you into acting out of character, they can finally look in the mirror and see a reflection that doesn't make them feel inferior. They weaponize the very transparency that once attracted them, turning every shared secret, every vulnerability, and every genuine moment into ammunition for a silent, calculated war against your self-worth. All because they lack the courage to look at their own reflection and change what is broken inside. The extraction dynamic governs the entire transactional economy of how a covertly resentful person interacts with an empathic individual. Human beings who carry a deep, unhealed internal deficit operate strictly on an emotional consumption model. They are incapable of generating their own self-worth, their own validation, or their own intrinsic joy. Because their internal well is completely dry, they must look outward to strip mine the emotional reserves of others. When they encounter an empath, someone whose emotional baseline is inherently abundant, generative, and wealthy, they recognize a primary source of fuel. They enter your life with an insatiable hunger, seeking to extract the validation, attention, and compassion that you naturally radiate. They present you with their wounds, their sob stories, and their manufactured crises, knowing that your empathic nature will compel you to pour your energy, your time, and your deep care into them. In the initial phases, this feels like a deep connection to the empath, but in reality, it is a psychological siphoning process. The resentful person takes your insights, your encouragement, and your unconditional support, and for a brief moment, they experience a psychological high. They feel validated, comforted, and stabilized because they are running on the premium fuel of your emotional wealth. But because this validation is entirely external, because it was given to them rather than generated by their own psychological labor, it carries a very short shelf life. It is like pouring water into a bucket riddled with holes. The moment they walk away from you, the high begins to evaporate, the empty void inside them reopens, and the familiar toxic drip of their internal misery returns. This creates a highly volatile state of psychological dependency. They blame you for the fact that the fuel ran out. They feel a growing, bitter irritation that they have to keep coming back to you to feel okay, and that dependency quickly curdles into a deep-seated hostility. They start to look at your ability to effortlessly generate your own peace and happiness as an unfair monopoly. They resent the fact that you possess an endless supply of the exact emotional currency they have to beg, borrow, and steal just to survive the day. As their resentment deepens, the nature of the extraction completely changes. They realize that simply asking for your light isn't enough anymore because it doesn't last. So their subconscious defense mechanisms shift the strategy from seeking validation to seeking control. They discover that they can get a different, more permanent kind of psychological fuel by actively provoking a negative reaction out of you. They realize that if they can make you angry, if they can make you cry, or if they can make you doubt your own sanity through subtle gaslighting and passive-aggressive behavior, they are still controlling your emotional state. To their warped ego, causing you to lose your peace is just as validating as receiving your praise, because both actions prove that they have absolute power over your emotional wealth. They begin to intentionally orchestrate scenarios to drain you, watching your confusion and distress with a quiet, sinister satisfaction, feeling a temporary sense of superiority because they have successfully forced a person of immense internal wealth to beg them for clarity, closure, or peace. The sabotage pivot represents the definitive psychological line where a covertly resentful person stops trying to acquire your traits and starts actively trying to destroy them. This is the moment when the subconscious mind of the predator accepts a brutal reality. They will never possess your innate joy. They will never have your authentic resilience, and they will never be able to duplicate your light. For the human ego, this realization is an existential emergency. When an individual cannot elevate themselves to match your baseline, their internal survival algorithm flips to the only other available option for restoring their sense of superiority. They must drag your baseline down beneath theirs. The strategic objective shifts entirely from acquisition to destruction. If they cannot have the light, they must ensure you do not have it either. Because if your light is extinguished, they no longer have to feel the crushing weight of their own inadequacy by comparison. This pivot is rarely loud, explosive, or obvious. It is a cold, calculated, and highly covert campaign of psychological warfare designed to execute a slow assassination of your self-worth. They begin to use your intimacy, your trust, and the secrets you trusted them with as precision-guided weapons. The very things they once praised about you become the exact targets of their subtle, daily sabotage. If you are known for your creativity, they will drop casual, passing comments about how your work seems unoriginal or tired. If you are celebrated for your kindness, they will subtly suggest to mutual acquaintances that your generosity is just a calculated performance to get attention. They work entirely in the shadows of plausible deniability, utilizing the weapon of the passive-aggressive whisper and the invisible undercut. They become masters of the toxic setup, intentionally placing you in social or professional situations where they know you will be uncomfortable, stressed, or pushed to your absolute limit. all while presenting themselves as your supportive ally. They watch your stress levels rise with a secret, deeply buried sense of triumph. Every time you show a sign of exhaustion, every time your confidence falters, and every time a shadow of self-doubt crosses your face, their internal deficit is temporarily satisfied. They are systematically strip mining your emotional architecture, chipping away at the foundation of your identity until you begin to question your own reality, your own talents, and your own sanity. They want to see you anxious, small, and dependent on their approval, because a broken empath is no longer a threatening mirror. A dimmed, hollowed-out version of you is the only version their fragile ego can tolerate. They will continue this silent extraction and demolition, step by step, smile by smile, until the vibrant person you used to be is completely replaced by a shell of insecurity, leaving you wondering how a person who claimed to be so close to you could look at your gradual unraveling and feel nothing but a quiet, twisted sense of relief. The boundary armor is the ultimate psychological evolution required for an empath to transition from a defenseless target into an unshakable, strategically defended force. For too long, the narrative surrounding highly empathetic individuals has been plagued by a dangerous delusion. The idea that the cure for predatory behavior is simply more kindness, more patience, and more radical understanding. This soft, unprotected approach is exactly what invites emotional strip mining into your life. When you operate with open, unguarded borders, you aren't showing love. You are broadcasting vulnerability to every covertly resentful profile in your immediate environment. The true defense mechanism against these individuals is not to retreat from the world, hide your light, or turn yourself into a cold, unfeeling cynic. That would mean the saboteurs have won, forcing you to destroy your own nature just to survive them. Instead, the answer lies in the immediate construction of a sophisticated behavioral filtration system. You must develop a sharp, clinical objectivity that allows you to observe human behavior exactly as it is, rather than how your hopeful, empathetic heart wishes it to be. This means you stop listening to the cheap, easily manufactured currency of flattering words and start tracking the highly revealing metrics of baseline behavior over time. The boundary armor requires you to treat your emotional wealth not as a public utility open to anyone who wanders by with a bucket, but as a high-value sovereign reserve. Every single person who wishes to enter your inner orbit must be subjected to an unspoken, rigorous psychological background check. You must look at how they react when you succeed, how they speak about people who aren't in the room, and how they handle the word no. The very first time a person leaks contempt, the very first time they deliver a calculated, double-edged compliment designed to plant a seed of self-doubt, or the very first time they attempt to manipulate you through a guilt trip, your armor must activate with absolute mathematical certainty. There can be no rationalizing away their hostility, no making excuses for their difficult childhood, and no offering second chances to someone who has demonstrated a predatory behavioral footprint. You do not argue, you do not over-explain yourself, and you do not engage in a toxic back and forth that allows them to play the victim and drain more of your energy. You simply, coldly, and permanently adjust their level of access to your life. You pull back the borders, tighten the gates, and reduce their clearance. If they are a colleague, you speak to them strictly about logistics. If they are a friend or partner, you remove them from your ecosystem entirely. This is not an act of anger or malice. It is a clinical act of self-preservation. When you wear this armor, you send a powerful, nonverbal signal to the social landscape. Your light is not free for the taking. It cannot be consumed, and it cannot be controlled. You force the covertly resentful individuals to realize that their usual tactics of subtle sabotage, and emotional extraction will not work on you.